France Info.
Alors, elles ne sont pas devant nous françaises, mais elles sont pas loin du podium. L'équipe de France de relais féminin de biathlon pour ces mondiaux. C'est l'épreuve de relais, donc je le disais, épreuve qu'on suit avec vous. Jérôme Val, vous êtes sur place, ça donne quoi? Alors on a la mi-course, Edouard, et c'est vrai que ça aurait pu quand même être un petit peu mieux pour les Françaises qui sont actuellement à la 5e place au relais qui vient d'être effectué. Il y a 32 secondes de retard sur la Norvège et pourtant la France a longtemps été au contact justement de ces Norvégiennes dans ce relais à quelques secondes près, à la 2e position, notamment sur le premier relais qui a été effectué par Anaïs Bescon. Ça a été parfait quasiment pour Anaïs Bescon, 0 faute au tir. Elle a passé le relais avec 27 secondes de retard. Anaïs Boucher qui a refait une partie de ce retard dans le deuxième relais, mais le dernier tour pour Anaïs Chevalier-Boucher a été assez terrible. Elle a perdu beaucoup de terrain. Et donc 5e place pour l'instant pour les Françaises. On est à la 3e relayeuse. C'est Chloé Chevalier qui est un peu la surprise de cette composition française du relais. Chloé Chevalier qu'on n'attendait pas forcément. On attendait peut-être Justine Breza qui est plus habituée à ce format de course, mais qui a été laissée de côté après. C'est vrai, un des de championnats du monde un peu compliqué.
Ouais. I got Jake to give Jenkins credit a couple of months ago. I remember. Jake told Jenkins at that time that he'd expect payment in 2 months. But Tom Jenkins was doing all right at his claim. I felt sure he'd be able to pay. That's true. It seems Tom came to town and told Jake his cabin had been ransacked and that what gold he had was stolen from him. Tom reported the robbery to me that day, and I went to investigate. But there were no clues to be found. I see. Go on. Well, the next day, which was a week ago, Tom went into the store, and Jake accused him of lying about being robbed as an excuse not to pay. Jake always thought people were trying to cheat him. Yes, he was a hard man to deal with. Well, it doesn't seem possible that he'd killed Jake for accusing him of lying. Tom didn't seem to be the quick-tempered type of man to me. He wasn't lying. A few men were lounging in the store at the time. I questioned them to find out just what took place. It seems that Tom Jenkins went to the store after he'd taken me out to investigate the robbery at his house. Hi, Jake. Jake, the constable went out to my cabin with me, and I'm sorry to say he couldn't find any clues that might help get back that stolen gold.
Yeah, see here, Tom Jenkins. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that you just made up that story about being robbed so as to put out paying me what you owe.
That kind of talk doesn't set well with me, Jake. I told the truth about that gold being stolen, and because of it, I can't pay right now. But you'll get paid later when I get more.
Hell, I've been taken in before by young fellas like you, Jenkins, who kept putting me up with trumped-up excuses until finally they just lit out from 40 Mile and left me holding the bag.
Well, you needn't worry about me doing that. When I say you'll get paid, you can count on it, even if it does take time.
I don't have to take your word for it, Jenkins. And what's more, I won't have to wait either.
Just what do you mean by that?
I'll tell you what I mean. I'm going to that lawyer fella here in town and get him to find legal means to take that claim of yours to cover that debt.
Jake, that claim is all I have, and you know it's a good paying claim. I'm not going to stand by and let you or anyone else take it away from me.
How is that so?
Yes, that's so.
You either get the money and pay me by tonight, or I'll stop proceedings to take over your claim, Jenkins. And what's more, there won't be anything that you can do about it.
Jake, I can't get the money by tonight. And I'm warning you to give up that idea of taking my claim, or you'll be mighty sorry, understand? That's all I got to say. Now, I better get out of here before I lose my temper. Then, after making that threat, Tom Jenkins walked out of the store. Well, what about the killing? And outside of the threat he made, what points to Tom as the killing? Old Jake was killed that night in his quarters in back of the store. And the store safe was robbed. But what about Tom? Well, I went over to Bear Creek Trail that afternoon. It snowed pretty heavily that night, continuing until noon the next day. I waited at Bear Creek until the snow stopped. Then I came back here, getting here about supper time. But then I learned of the murder. And there were mutterings in town about Tom. Because of the threat he'd made? Yes. I went to Jake's place and looked things over. The killer had gotten Jake to let him in somehow. Then I figured he left by the back door, which was unbolted when I looked it over. I opened it and looked out the back. The heavy snowfall had smoothed everything over. There were no tracks or marks there. I still don't see where Tom fits into this, Ned. I'm coming to that. I went to the cafe to question everyone. I knew most of the townsmen would be there.
We're sure glad you're back in town, Constable. We're all anxious to see you get the low-down sneak who shot and robbed poor old Jake last night.
I've just come from Jake's place. I have some questions to ask.
Go ahead, Constable.
Sure. What do you want to know?
What's the latest anyone saw Jake alive last night?
Dave Baxter can tell you most of what you want to know. Him and Rusty Jackson were in the store at closing time with some of us. And the two of them were the ones that discovered the killing.
That's right.
All right, Dave. What about it?
Well, several of us were in the store when Jake said he wanted to lock up. So we all left and came here to the cafe.
Did any one person stay there with Jake after you left?
No, we all went out. Jake turned the lock behind us.
Right.
Yeah, that was about 10 o'clock last night.
Yes,
A little before midnight, Rusty and I started for our cabin. As we passed Jake's door, we noticed the lamp was lighted in the back room. The light was shining through a big crack in the window shutter.
Go on, then what?
Well, we figured since he was still awake, he might open up and give us some chewing tobacco. So we banged on the front door.
Jake will always open up if he's awake like that.
Yeah. I guess that's how the killer got in.
And when Jake didn't answer, we went around to the back. They're not there. And I tried the back door. It was unbolted and open when I pressed the latch. Right away, Rusty and I saw Jake lying on the floor. We ran right back here because we knew the doctor was here and that you were out of town.
Yeah, I got the doctor's report as soon as I got back.
I hate to tell you this, Constable, but Tom Jenkins threatened Jake yesterday morning. Several of us here heard him do it.
Right, we did. Jenkins must have done it.
Yeah. He could have slipped away from here without anyone noticing.
So could any one of you men, for that matter. I'll question Tom Jenkins, of course.
Here comes Rusty.
Yeah. He seems excited, too.
Constable, I found something that might be just the clue you're looking for.
What have you found, Rusty?
This glove. It was at the foot of the back steps at Jake's place.
When did you find this?
Just a short time ago. The doctor said you were in town and might want to ask me some questions. I went to Jake's thinking you might still be there.
Strange, I didn't find this glove a while ago.
You went in the front way, Constable. You just looked out the back door. You didn't search. If that was at the foot of the steps, it was probably out of sight from the doorway.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, Constable, you won't have to go far to find who owns that glove either.
Oh? How do you know?
Go on, tell him, Rusty.
Well, after I picked up the glove, I started up the street toward the cafe here. I caught up to Tom Jenkins walking this way, too.
Why didn't Tom come in?
I'm getting to that. I showed him the glove and I said, Tom, seems to me I've seen you wear gloves like this. Tom stopped walking and said, no, you couldn't have. Then right away he says, where did you get that glove? He seemed upset.
Yeah, I bet he recognized it all right.
Sure he did. He was bug-eyed staring at it. Then I told him where I found it, and then I was taking it to the constable. When I said that, he turned around and ran back in the direction of his cabin on the edge of town.
Tom's the one who killed Jake.
Sure. He threatened Jake, then went through with it.
That settles it, Constable. Tom Jenkins is the one who killed Jake. You better get after him before he hits the trail away from 40 miles.
What you told me, Ned, does make Jenkins a logical suspect. But you'll need more to make a case. The point that clinches it, Sergeant, is that Tom Jenkins was gone when I went to his cabin. Huh? Well, that does look bad. Did you pick up his trail at all? Yes, Tom headed up the Bear Creek Trail. I got my dog team and started after him. It started to snow again. Then a few miles from town, I stepped into a small ice crevice, injuring my leg. I gave up and came back to 40 Mile. Then I sent for you. I see. That means there's only one thing to do now. Go after Tom and get him before he has a chance to cross the border. If he hasn't reached it already. I figure he wouldn't be foolish enough to try going on through the weather we've been having. Let's see. Tom's had about 3 days' start. Yes, but I feel sure he'll hole up someplace along the trail. And this blizzard will keep him there a while. Let's hope you're right. I better make preparations to be on my way. You mean you're going right now in this blizzard? Yes, if I wait until it stops, Jenkins will push on before I can catch him. I realize the risk I'll be taking, but I'm going to get Tom Jenkins and bring him back. We'll continue our adventure in just a few moments. Hey, old-timer, you look pretty busy there panning for gold.
Well, son, when you're first fishing for gold up here in the Yukon, even forget about eating.
But not when you have a heaping bowl full of Quaker puffed wheat or Quaker puffed rice waiting for you.
What kind of vittles are those?
Why, haven't you heard? They're the swellest tasting breakfast cereals from here to Whitehorse. They're the famous cereals shot from guns.
Shot from guns?
Yep. Quaker puffed rice and Quaker puffed wheat are actually shot from guns to make them deliciously crisp and tender. They're exploded up to 8 times normal size. That makes them bigger and better tasting.
Well, that's a new one on me.
Yes, sirree. They're magnified, crispified. Shot through and through with bang-up nut-like flavor, too.
Guess I'll do a little prospecting on that Quaker puffed rice and Quaker puffed wheat.
Believe me, your appetite sure strikes it rich when you pour out a heaping bowlful of those tenderly crisp, melt-in-your-mouth, king-size kernels of wheat or rice shot from guns.
Don't I have to cook them or nothing?
No cooking. Just add milk or cream and top with your favorite fruit.
Mighty handy for a busy gold prospector.
For any busy person. And mighty nourishing, too. Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice furnish added food values of restored natural grain amounts of vitamin B1, niacin, and iron.
I'm going to get me a sack of them right away.
Not a sack, old-timer. Quaker puffed rice and wheat are never sold in bags or bulk. And that's something for you fellas and girls to remember, too. Always look for the big red and blue boxes with the smiling Quaker man on the front. Then you'll be sure to get the original, crisp, fresh, delicious Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice. Now to continue. It was late afternoon when Sergeant Preston left 40 Mile and headed up the Bear Creek Trail. Once more, the Mountie felt the fury of the storm as King led the dog team along the wind-swept, drift-covered trail northward. Preston reasoned that Jenkins was smart enough to stick to the trail and would take cover at the first opportunity. Though the blizzard was, in a way, an aiding factor that would keep the hunted man from moving on, Preston also knew it was an enemy that could bring about his own death if adverse circumstances should arise. His progress was slow, but still he pushed on.
Take the way, fellow. Push!
After 3 hours of torturous travel, interspersed with short periods of rest, Sergeant Preston reached a part of the trail that ran along an icy ridge. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind was still blowing strongly.
Kinda
tough going, eh, fella? Wind swept the trail clean to drifts, King. There's a frozen crust along here, so we have to move carefully. The wind's almost strong enough now to blow us into the ravine. Let's go, fella. Once more they moved on, bucking the wind that blew in a clean sweep across the high ridge. Gradually, the ridge curved, so that within a short time, the gale was hitting from the side, and at times, making the heavy sled slide dangerously near the edge. Suddenly, Preston frantically jammed the scraping foot brake and called to the team as one of the main harness straps broke, swinging the sled partially sideways. For a moment, Preston stood breathing heavily as he noticed how close to the edge of the ridge trail the sled had swung.
It was close. Almost had a serious accident, King. Have to fix that strap in a hurry. Better have a look at it.
Stepping around the sled, Preston started along the few feet of space between the sled and the edge of the ravine. Suddenly, with a sharp cracking noise, the overhanging ledge of icy snow gave way. Frantically, the Mountie tried to throw himself toward the sled in safety. And then, with a cry, he hurtled downward into the deep, narrow ravine. Landing in deep snow at the bottom of the ravine, Sergeant Preston lay for a moment without moving. And then he slowly struggled to his feet.
I don't seem to be hurt. The snowdrift eased my fall, but it sure knocked the breath out of me.
For a moment he stared at the steep walls of the ravine, and he inwardly berated himself for not being more careful. A quick look around convinced the Mountie that there was no way out of the ravine, which was closed off all around by sheer, steep walls of ice. Realizing that help had to get to him as soon as possible if he were to get out alive, he called to King on the ridge above.
King! King! The constable, boy! Get the constable! Go on, fella! Get the constable! King, boy, hurry! Bring Ned here, King!
For a short moment, the great dog stood whining and looking down at his master. And then, with a flash of understanding, the intelligent dog, barking furiously, started back along the trail toward 40 Mile. Meanwhile, in an old cabin a short distance up the trail where the ridge ended, Tom Jenkins stood staring through a window.
The snow has stopped now. If that wind had died down a bit, I'd take a chance on hitting the trail again. With luck, I'd get across the border in a few hours. I didn't dare risk it in that storm up to now. I'll start getting some grub together.
As Tom turned from the window, a distant sound carried by the wind caused him to stop and listen intently.
Dog barking. It might be the constable. But I was sure he wouldn't attempt to buck the storm. I have to find out. I just have to. I'll take my rifle and walk around the bend in the trail.
Quickly putting on his parka, Tom took his rifle and left the cabin. He walked the 200 yards to the point where there was a bend in the trail. From there, he could see along the ridge trail. The eerie light of the Yukon, combined with the whiteness of the snow-covered terrain, made it bright enough to see for some distance. As Tom rounded the bend, he stopped and held his rifle in readiness as he saw an empty sled with a dog team resting on the snow.
The dogs. There's no one in sight. There's no place for anyone to hide.
He stood a few moments watching, and then, with cautious steps, he moved slowly forward to investigate. As he approached, the sled dog stood up and started barking.
Nobody's with the sled, that's certain. Quiet! Quiet, you huskies! Holy smoke, somebody's in the ravine.
Tom moved to the edge of the ravine, then stopped and looked downward.
Mounties. Sergeant Preston.
Jenkins! Tom Jenkins!
Sergeant, were you coming after me?
That's how I was. Stepped on an overhanging ledge. If you don't help me out of here, I'll freeze to death.
I'm accused of murder. If I leave you there, I can get across the border and make it to the States.
I know. You can't refuse to help a man in a spot like this, Tom.
I'll help you on one condition, Sergeant.
I can't bargain with you, Tom. If I'm able, it's my duty to take you back.
Then I won't help you out. I won't go back to be hanged for a murder I didn't commit.
If you didn't commit that murder, Tom, best thing to do is stay and try to prove your innocence. If you don't help me, you will have a death on your hands for sure.
No. I've decided. I'm going to get my dog sled and head for the border while I've still got the chance. I'm sorry, Sergeant. So long.
After Tom Jenkins left, Sergeant Preston fought the desire to call him back, to promise Jenkins anything for his help. Preston clamped his teeth together to prevent giving voice to the words that welled up in his throat. Self-preservation was a strong human instinct, but his pledge to perform his duty had the upper hand within the mountain. He knew it was a challenge of Yukon wind and cold and ice that would mean death, perhaps, before the great dog king could return with help. But Sergeant Preston decided to meet that challenge rather than to compromise his devotion to duty.
It's no use. I can't take his help if it means a promise to let him go. I won't do it.
20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of freezing winds howling over a prospective victim. Preston knew too well the results of creeping, insidious sub-zero cold. He was determined to fight off this enemy as long as possible. But time was an added weapon to the elements of the Yukon winter. He moved about for better circulation and looked hopelessly at the icy walls that hemmed him in. Suddenly, his eyes caught movement at the top of the ridge. Then he gazed up into the eyes of Tom Jenkins.
Tom! I thought you'd left.
I couldn't do it, Sergeant. I couldn't go and leave you there. I had to come back.
You're going to get me out?
Yes. I bought a rope from the cabin.
I can't promise you anything, Tom.
I don't expect you to. Get ready to grab the rope when I pull it down.
Right.
I'll have you out of there in a few minutes.
After the rescue, the two men and the dog team went to the cabin where Preston could get warmth and rest. Tom said little while they had hot coffee. Then Sergeant Preston spoke.
Tom, I haven't changed my mind. I have to take you back.
I knew you wouldn't change, Sergeant.
You could have left me and made it to the border.
Yeah, I know, but I couldn't leave a man to die.
I know you couldn't. And I don't believe you could kill a man either. I'm taking you back, Tom, but I'll do everything possible to find out just who did kill old Jake.
Well, let's get back to 40 Mile.
Just outside of 40 Mile, on the trail, Preston and Tom met the constable. After a quick explanation, they all returned to the constable's office. A short time later, Sergeant Preston and Tom were talking to the constable, while King lay nearby. Tom saved my life, Constable, even though he could have made a getaway by leaving me there.
I couldn't leave you, Sergeant. What's more, I didn't kill Jake. And the sergeant convinced me it was best to try to prove myself innocent.
By saving the sergeant, you showed you aren't a killer. King's actions when he got here made me sure something had happened. He couldn't have reached there in time. I feel sure of that.
Now we have to think about Jake's murder, Ned.
There's one thing, Sergeant, that set me thinking.
Huh? What's that?
The glove, Tom's glove. It was found by Jake's back porch. It was clean and dry when Rusty Jackson gave it to him.
Sure about that?
Yes. It's here in my desk drawer. Here it is.
That was one of a new pair of gloves I'd never worn. They were missing after I was robbed at my cabin. But I got panicky when Rusty showed it to me and said it was found at Jake's.
It snowed all night the night Jake was murdered, didn't you say, Ned?
That's right.
Well, that glove would have been hidden under the snow, where it wouldn't be easily found. And it would have been frozen stiff if Rusty brought it to you as soon as he found it, as he says.
That's right. That's what I was thinking.
Rusty Jackson lied when he said he found that glove the day after the murder.
And he and Dave Baxter were the ones who supposedly discovered the body.
Tom, you stay here with King. The constable and I have some unfinished business to attend to with the cabin Baxter and Jackson share.
We'll catch them off guard.
That's what I'm hoping.
Come on.
In their cabin, Dave and Rusty were talking.
Here's Sergeant Preston come to town today and started out after Jenkins.
I reckon Jenkins is over the border by this time and still going. That storm was enough to slow the Mountie down anyway.
Yeah. By morning, the wind ought to be down and the storm blowing out. So we'll pack up and head away from here. I wonder who that is.
Better have my gun handy. Go open the door.
All right.
I want to talk to you and Jackson, Baxter.
Yeah? Come on in.
Hey, thought you went after Jenkins, Sergeant.
I did, and he's here in town. But we're not satisfied that he's the man we want.
And you got enough on him to prove he is.
That your parka hanging there, Jackson? Yeah. What about it?
Mind if I look it over?
Hey, I don't get that.
Neither do I. I notice you're holding a gun.
Oh, that? Rusty was just being careful.
Sergeant, look here. You recognize this glove?
The mate to the one said to be found at Jake's.
Hey, get away from there.
No, you don't.
No.
Hey, what the hell move back there?
Here's a poke of gold in Rusty's pocket, too.
They are.
The initials TJ on the bag.
These two robbed Jenkins, and they robbed and killed Jake. Now we can be sure of that. You'll both hang.
No, you can't pin that on me. Rusty's
That's
over
your plan doing it. Blaming Jenkins. I didn't want to
That's enough, Jackson. You can talk later. Well, Ned, we know enough now to take them in for Jake's murder.
That planted glove gave them away to begin with. We'll take them in, Sergeant. They'll talk enough. Even if they don't, I can complete the case against them.
That's right. And now Tom Jenkins is cleared. As far as I'm concerned, Ned, this case is closed. In just a moment, Sergeant Preston will give you a preview of Monday's adventure. Remember, here's the breakfast that wins the praise of so many top-action Hollywood movie stars. It's delicious, tenderly crisp, nourishing Quaker puffed wheat or Quaker puffed rice. Your family, too, will go for the tempting taste and nut-like flavor of wheat or rice shot from guns. You'll want to try them starting tomorrow. Remember, to get the original, crisp, fresh, shot from guns cereal, always look for the famous big red and blue package with the smiling Quaker man on the front. They're never sold in bags or bulk. Get Quaker puffed wheat and Quaker puffed rice. Listen Monday when Sergeant Preston and Yukon King meet the challenge of the Yukon in the case of Copper Gulch Patrol. When Constable Joe Carson was murdered, King and I had to take his personal belongings to his parents. On this patrol, an unusual turn of events brought me face to face with the three men who had killed Joe Carson. I was trapped and outnumbered by desperate outlaws who would stop at nothing to escape the hangman. Be sure to hear this exciting adventure Monday. These radio dramas, a feature of the Challenge of the Yukon Incorporated, are created and produced by George W. Trendle, directed by Fred Flowerday, and supervised by Charles D. Livingston. The part of Sergeant Preston is played by Paul Sutton. They are brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at the same time by Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice. The breakfast cereal shot from guns. For a delicious hot breakfast, eat Quaker Oats. The giant of the cereals is Quaker Oats. Delicious, nutritious, makes you feel ambitious. The giant of the cereals is Quaker Oats. Say, boys and girls, do you want to be a star someday in sports and activities? Then start on good Quaker Oats breakfast tomorrow. Because nourishing oatmeal gives you more growth and endurance than any other whole grain cereal. Remember, Quaker and Mother's Oats are the same.
You're listening to Chin Radio AM 1540, the voice of multicultural Toronto, bringing you the latest updates on COVID-19. Stay informed, stay safe, and stay tuned to Chin Radio AM 1540.
Now, as howling winds echo across the snow-covered reaches of the wild Northwest, the Quaker Oats Company, makers of Quaker Puffed Wheat and Quaker Puffed Rice, the delicious cereal shot from guns, in cooperation with the Mutual Broadcasting System, present by special recording Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. It's Yukon King, swiftest and strongest lead dog of the Northwest, breaking the trail for Sergeant Preston of the Northwest Mounted Police in his relentless pursuit of lawbreakers. And King on you, Husky! Gold discovered in the Yukon. A stampede to the Klondike in the wild race for riches. Back to the days of the gold rush. And the adventures of Sergeant Preston and his wonder dog, Yukon King, as they meet the challenge of the Yukon.
Our adventure will begin in just a moment. The principle of the best education possible for our children has been one of the basic cornerstones of our nation. But the ever-increasing enrollment in elementary schools has resulted in poor educational conditions in many communities across the country. Most important, there is an insufficiency of elementary school teachers. Teaching is an occupation that is more attractive now than ever before, since there is a growing public interest in education and measures are being taken to improve schools. Such a career offers exceptional opportunities for intelligent, imaginative young men and women who are now in college. The lack of teachers is only one side of this problem. Some places require additional school buildings. Others need more equipment, textbooks, and personnel. If these problems are to be met and solved, the cooperation of every citizen is a must. See what you can do. Better schools build better communities. This message is brought to you as a public service. Sergeant Preston of the Northwest Mounted Police was seated in the inspector's office in Dawson City.
I know you just returned from patrol duty north of here, Sergeant, but I'm afraid you'll have to leave Dawson immediately on another assignment.
What's all right with me, sir? Why, too?
Whitehorse. You can take the last boat of the season as far as Selkirk, then make Whitehorse on horseback before the snow flies, I think.
The boat leaves this afternoon, sir. I'll be on it.
Good. The reason I want you to go down there, Sergeant, is because a man named Trigger Strong, who was awaiting trial in Skagway, broke jail and managed to escape across the border.
I see.
I received a telegram last night about him. An accomplice helped him to escape. Trigger is about 30, big man, black beard.
Now, what makes you think he'll show up in Whitehorse, sir? Strong might double back across the border into the States.
It seems Strong had a wife and small son. She left him a few years ago, took the boy and joined her father in Whitehorse. You see, he never knew where they had gone until after he was taken into custody. His wife's father's picture was in the papers after he made a strike. The article mentioned Traeger's wife and son.
Was this information about Strong in that telegram you received last night, sir?
Of course not. You see, I met the wife's father when he first came to the Yukon. He was here in Dawson for a short time. And then 2 weeks ago, Clem Harris, that's his name, came here on business. He told me all about Traeger and his own daughter, and about Traeger Strong's capture.
Oh, so that's it, sir. I know Clem and his daughter. I'll do all I can to find Strong, Inspector. I'll take King with me.
Good. Between the two of you, I feel confident you'll bring in Strong if he's anywhere near White House. Goodbye and good luck, Sergeant.
Thank you, sir. Meantime, on the trail through White Pass and their journey toward Whitehorse, Traeger Strong and his companion Curly Thorne discussed future plans as they rode. Curly was saying,
Tell me, Traeger, what if we do locate that wife and kid of yours? What good will that do us? She ran out on you a few years ago. You don't expect her to hide us out, do you?
Don't be a fool, Curly. I'll be the first one to turn us in if she got the chance.
For Pete's sake, why do you want to find her?
Several reasons. She walked out on me. She left a note saying the kid had never known his old man was an outlaw. Well, now, since I learned her father struck it rich, and that Ella and Bobby are with him, I figure I'm getting some of that cash through Ella. To get back to her, I'm going to tell the kid that I'm his father.
Saw that the test results from the condo tower where the South African variant will try emotional reactions, but we're human. What was your initial thought? It couldn't have been a good one.
Well, you know, I think the first thing I said is not a game. Like,
yeah,
I'm feeling like that's a game, right? You know, it's just the reality is the variants are here, and to the extent that we had a bid there to say, all right, we don't have widespread community transmission of the 351 variant that was originally detected in South Africa that we've been able to note so far, but we have this condo cluster. Like, what's going on over there? So that's why we were able to say, you know what, the safest thing to do is, can we try to contain it? Can we try to just make sure that we've left no stone unturned? And we're really grateful for that whole condo corporation and the residents all stepping up, because ultimately we've done over 500 tests. We're just starting to get the results back now, piecing together the investigations. A couple more cases were detected of the 351 variant, so there's 7 in total that we're aware of in that cluster. But it really helps our investigation, because now we can hopefully say, all right, let's try to make sure, at least we know the 117 variant is becoming more and more widespread. That's driving a lot of our numbers on one side, but we want to make sure that the 351 variant is contained as much as possible.
The last couple of things. Where do you stand on the wait for certain other corporations' vaccines? Feels like we've been waiting on Oxford AstraZeneca, which is not Pfizer, which has not seemed to have the efficacy that Pfizer does. Johnson & Johnson, some of the numbers seem incredibly positive, but that's going to take some time as well. It's not like, these vaccines are being used widespread in other countries and we're missing out. So the U.S. is obviously hesitating as well on Oxford AstraZeneca. Are you hopeful about those two companies?
Well, I think I trust my colleagues at Health Canada. I used to work actually at the Public Health Agency of Canada in vaccine safety. Met a lot of really good people there, and I know the caliber of the work they do. I'm sure they're looking at the data with the Canadian population and context in mind, and hopefully will make a determination as to how it can be best used. I imagine the questions are more around, what does the data look like for certain age groups, certain communities, and trying to figure out what the best way would be to deploy it.
Lawrence Lowe, Medical Officer of Health in Peel Region. Thanks very much for your insight, your perspective, and for the work you're doing. I greatly appreciate the time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. Dr. Lawrence Lowe, our guest on Global News Radio 640 Toronto. Yeah, I mean, the messaging about the vaccines, that's in essence what we can all agree on. Look, we can all differ about, should this be open? Should that be open? Should this be closed? We've had, vigorous debates about schools and where things are at. And you can even, putting even schools under one umbrella has been a little bit ridiculous. It's incredibly different. The experience in my household, as many of you know, I've got one kid in high school, one kid in elementary school. The distinction between the two and what their days are like and what their potential exposure is like, to me, is night and day. And I had tremendous confidence in the high school plan, where there's no lunches, there's no recess, kids aren't bringing food to school. There's not a lot of common, chit-chat time like there is in elementary school lunches. And you're talking 15 people. high schools, at least where I am, and I think in most regions of the GTA, have not wavered one bit from 15 kids. Elementary schools have been fluctuating classes. Some, I hear from the teachers who have 26 kids in their class. It is impossible to distance. And beyond the obvious as well, and we'll get to this a good chunk of the 8 o'clock hour, in that the idea that things are tighter and more robust and there's asymptomatic testing and all these new safeguards, not so much. Not so much. So this is a gamble. This is a bet. We all have been making them for a good chunk of time now, basically, a year, 12 months, and we've all been, rolling our collective dice. And some of us are more willing to do it than others. Some of us, because of inequalities in the system that cannot be corrected, cannot be corrected. We're just willing to take those chances with our kids and our own health, and we're confident with how we do it. But nonetheless, you've got a scenario where there's not a lot of new safeguards in schools that are making people more confident. And then we add in the vaccines. And I want to get there at the start of next hour before we talk to Dan Carcillo about that. 7 o'clock news on the way. It's the Greg Brady Show on this Saturday morning on Global News Radio 640 Toronto.
I'm Clarice. Are you famous? Sort of.
The silence is finally over.
You are a woman with a very public reputation for hunting monsters.
I can't have a reputation. I've only done it once.
Based on The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris.
What matters is the victims. I am just trying to find out how deep this goes. Do not tell me to slow down. You catch up.
Clarice, new drama, Thursday on Global. Also available through State TV.
Hello, Clarice. Staying in control of your money can be tough. Luckily, the CIBC Smart Account helps by actively monitoring your everyday banking. It even sends you alerts when you may be short funds and reminders about upcoming payments, so you avoid unnecessary fees and stay in control of your money. Open your CIBC Smart Account today. Get $300 and pay no monthly fee for up to 12 months. That's not just smart, that's everyday smart from CIBC. Conditions apply. Learn more at cibc.com/smart.
I'm Joseph Newberger, criminal defense lawyer. In life, you can face unexpected events, especially during stressful times. If you are facing a criminal charge, it is crucial to hire a highly experienced criminal lawyer. At Newberger & Partners, we take a team approach to successfully protecting your rights. If your future is on the line, we're here to help. Please contact us for a consultation at 416-364-3111 or at nrlawyers.com. That's nrlawyers.com.
Prioritizing your family's health is important, and getting an annual eye exam is an essential part of it. So visit your neighborhood Pearl Vision. They put safety first, and right now they're offering 40% off lenses for adults and free lenses for kids with frame purchase. They direct bill most insurance plans too, making the process easy. Why wait any longer? Arrange your family's eye exams at pearlvision.ca today. Valid prescription required. Valid at participating locations. Restrictions apply. Taxes extra. See store for details. Ends 3/31/2021. Exams available at the independent doctors of optometry at or next to Pearl Vision.
It was a big night for Nissan at the award season sales event.
Let's check out a highlight, Susie.
And now, with more standard safety innovations than ever, the award goes to 2020 Qashqai.
A gripping performance by Qashqai. Finance at Qashqai S front-wheel drive from the equivalent of $72 weekly at 0% for up to 84 months. Or get up to $3,000 standard rate finance cash and other Qashqai models.
Visit Nissan.ca or contact your Nissan. $314 monthly. Selling price is $26,378. Conditions apply.
We're told to save for a rainy day, but why not save for a rainy decade? You worked hard for that money, and you're about to put it in there? At Tangerine, you can make that money make money with investments that tend to themselves. Our new mutual funds are called Global ETF Portfolios, and for as little as $25, you'll be investing before you can say, what, the ETF? So start making moves with your money, because investing is in. Visit tangerine.ca and get started today.
We believe in a greater Toronto. This is CFMJ Global News Radio 640 Toronto, a Chorus Entertainment Company. You're listening to Global News Radio 640 Toronto. This is Global News at 7 o'clock.
From the National Newsroom of the Canadian Press, I'm Rob Westgate. Non-essential travel restrictions between Canada and the U.S. have been extended to March 21st. The main reasoning behind the move is the growing threat posed by new COVID-19 variants, which appear to be more contagious. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair gave the update late last night, saying the government was following the best public health advice to keep Canadians safe. Shut down almost a year ago now, the border closure has been extended month by month. Saskatchewan's Ministry of Health is hanging up the Help Wanted sign 11 months into the pandemic, and the ministry has put out an expression of interest trying to find emergency response staff for the province's personal care homes. The plan is to have teams of care aides with coordination and oversight who can be deployed anywhere in the province in case of an outbreak. The province has been struggling with COVID-19 outbreaks in care homes since at least the fall. Union officials representing workers at a pork plant in Red Deer, Alberta, say they are exploring legal options to ensure staff get paid during a COVID-19 shutdown brought on by an outbreak. Quebec-based Olymel closed its hog slaughtering operation there earlier this week. Olymel has also been working to ease a backlog that has pinched prairie hog farmers. As of yesterday, Alberta Health had been notified of 426 cases linked to the outbreak, 212 of which were active, and one worker has died. An Indigenous leader says fish farm companies on Vancouver Island, upset about the federal government's plan to phase out salmon farms on the Discovery Islands, were given ample notice the move was coming. Bob Chamberlain says the salmon farm companies should have been prepared for the policy announcement, which dates back to the last federal election and a Salmon Commission report more than a decade ago.
You know, the thing is, the decision that the minister has made is the correct decision. It's the one that is supported broadly across British Columbia. And I equate that to the growing knowledge and the growing science.
Federal Fisheries Minister Bernadette Jordan announced last December that the federal government will phase out 18 salmon farms on the Discovery Islands within 18 months. And finally, the 518-year-old Mona Lisa has seen many things in her life on a wall, but rarely this. Almost 4 months with no visitors to the Louvre. It's uncertain just when the Paris Museum will reopen after being closed on October 30th, in line with the French government's COVID-19 measures. However, the forced closure has granted museum officials a golden opportunity to carry out long overdue refurbishments that were simply not possible with nearly 10 million visitors a year. In total, 10 large-scale projects that were on hold since last March are underway, and officials say they are progressing fast. This is the Canadian Press. In sports, Gaetan Haas scored the eventual game winner as the Edmonton Oilers topped the Calgary Flames 2-1. Jesse Puljujarvi scored his 5th goal in his last 7 games for Edmonton, and the Oilers goaltender Mike Smith managed to turn away 20 shots for his 2nd straight win. Meantime, the Winnipeg Jets earned a 2-0 victory over the Vancouver Canucks, Mark Scheifele scoring for the Jets on a first-period breakaway. Over to the hard court, Norm Powell scored a season-high 31 points as the Toronto Raptors beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. Final score there was 86-81. Fred VanVleet had 12 points and 7 rebounds, while Pascal Siakam added 10 points and 9 boards. And out to the fairways and greens, Sam Burns fired a 566 to tie the 36-hole record at the Genesis Invitational, building a 5-shot lead as well through 2 rounds. Mackenzie Hughes is currently the top Canadian, sitting at 2 under par. From the Canadian Press, I'm Rob Westgate.
Who doesn't like sliding down a hill on a snowy winter day? It's super fun if you're doing it in a toboggan, less so in your car. That's why right now you can lease a 2020
for anyone else, accusing Ethiopia of slander. It's believed Ethiopia's comments about a third party are related to Egypt. Relations with Cairo have deteriorated after Ethiopia built a huge dam on the River Nile. In tennis, Naomi Osaka of Japan has won the women's final of the Australian Open in Melbourne, securing her 4th Grand Slam title. She defeated the American Jennifer Brady in straight sets 6-4, 6-3. After the match, Osaka said the fan support added to the atmosphere given the coronavirus restrictions.
Thank you for coming and watching. It feels really incredible for me. I didn't play my last Grand Slam with fans, so just to have this energy, it really means a lot. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for opening your hearts and your arms towards us, and for sure, I feel like playing a Grand Slam right now is a super privilege, and it's something that I won't take for granted.
BBC News.
Welcome to the inquiry. I'm Charmaine Cozier. Each week, one question, 4 experts, and an answer. 3 men are working in a space station around 200 miles above Earth. Suddenly, they receive a warning about a threat that could kill them. It's closing in at over 30,000 miles an hour. They have 90 minutes before it's due. The trio moves slowly and silently through a dimly lit white tunnel, using precious time to lock down metal hatches and make their way towards a hopefully more secure location. They climb into a cold, dark, cramped, sealed capsule and wait. The threat continues towards them. The deadly deadline arrives and passes. Then a radio message announces collision has been avoided. It's from Mission Control. The American astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts on board the International Space Station are safe. The threat was a fragment from an old weather satellite launched in 1979. Since that near miss in 2015, thousands more obsolete objects have been abandoned in space, increasing the risks of working satellites being damaged or even destroyed. So this week we're asking, can we solve our space junk problem?
Part 1. The satellite and the syndrome.
Were you always interested in space?
Yes, as a kid, that was my main interest. In fact, I ended up building a telescope. Any chance that I would get to study anything about the planets, I was just extremely interested in. My name's Don Kessler. I started the orbital debris program at NASA back in 1978.
Don joined NASA a few years before that, when natural objects, not manufactured ones, were seen as the biggest danger to spacecraft.
My original assignment was, what's the hazard in space when you're going from Earth to Moon? What will the natural meteoroid environment do with that?
He used numbers to interpret meteorite collisions and the subsequent chain of collisions as fragments break off and hit other fragments. Don suddenly realized the same thing could happen with orbiting satellites, an issue that had been overlooked. A few years later, he investigated further to analyze the snowball effect of those satellite collisions over time.
Once I did those calculations, and it was a pretty easy thing to do because it was a statistical analysis, I was really surprised at how quickly the meteoroid environment would be exceeded by the hazards of the debris environment from collisions between satellites. The hazard will continue to increase at an exponential rate due to the fact that you have collisions between objects, and the number of collisions that take place is proportional to how many objects that you have in space.
Basically, you've got a piece of debris that crashes into another bit of debris, that splinters, that debris goes into other debris, and you get this ongoing cascading effect.
That's correct. You essentially get a runaway effect where the environment continually get worse until you ground up all of the big stuff into small stuff. And that will take actually centuries to do, but in the process of doing it, it creates a very large hazard to spacecraft.
Don's theory is now known as the Kessler effect. At first, it was dismissed as being too theoretical. Plus, there was the view that
space is infinite and therefore it can't possibly be a problem. They were thinking of space in general, and that's true when you're talking about the solar system on a large scale. But what we were doing was trying to cram a lot of satellites into a small region. And this region that is the most crowded is what we call low Earth orbit now, and that's roughly anything below about 1,000 kilometers in altitude.
Don also highlighted the extensive damage that tiny bits of space debris can do. Before that, NASA relied on a list which only tracked larger objects.
There's this false conception that if it was launched, we knew what it was and where it was. But that was false. They only could track down to about 10 centimeters. That was the smallest thing that they could see. And we knew that there were explosions in space, and explosions are bound to create particles smaller than that. And then plus, when you get into the collision phenomena, there's even more small fragments created when you have a collision.
Even a fragment that's 1 millimeter in diameter can pierce a spacecraft's outer shielding. Don had struggled to get support from NASA, but his work eventually forced a change in attitude. With funding and a team in place, he examined damaged parts from US space shuttles, which had returned from missions.
When the shuttle was flying, it came back as a really valuable source of information about what's in orbit, because it would come back with pits all over it. So there's evidence all over the place that things are being hit all the time.
These reusable shuttles provided some of the most important data, proving that Don was right to be concerned about collisions caused by man-made objects. One returned from space with a gash in its window so deep the component had to be replaced. The cause was a tiny fragment of man-made space junk.
Then we did analysis as to where that came from. It was a fleck of white paint that came off with another satellite.
Don used that small piece of shuttle window to get his message across to a senior military official.
I had it in my pocket when I was talking to him. When I pulled that out of my pocket and showed it to him, he looked at it and he said, no, one person's data point is worth 1,000 people's speculation. He understood exactly, okay, we're damaging things in space, and here's a sample of it.
Don left NASA in 1996. He's in his 80s now, living in a retirement community, and still passionate about this issue.
Well, I think I've done as much as I could.
Has the time passed? Is it too late to clean up space?
No, it's not. In some ways, it's very similar to climate change. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to reverse.
Part 2. Dirty bathwater.
I think the first thing that we need to do is recognize that near-Earth space is a finite resource. My name is Moraba Jah, and I am an associate professor of aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics at the University of Texas at Austin.
Moraba is determined to highlight the amount and type of junk that's orbiting Earth. He says there's more to it than dead satellites, bits of spacecraft, or rocket parts.
Everything from astronaut gloves and wrenches to bolts, sheets of multi-layer insulation that have unfurled from satellites. This is what is officially called mission-related debris that's left as part of business as usual.
Who's keeping records of them? How do we know what's up there?
That's a great question. So the U.S. Space Command has the world's largest accessible database of these objects. I mean, it started off with Sputnik, and they've just been sequentially adding numbers, but then Russia, through JSC Vimpel catalog, has several thousand objects, which are not the same as the ones that Space Command has.
It's difficult to track everything or know for certain where objects are. That information is crucial to allow functional satellites and craft to navigate past them. To help with that, Moraba crowdsourced and developed a space traffic monitoring resource.
It's a website called Astrograph, and it's accessible right now to anybody on the planet.
It sources data from around the world on actively tracked objects and their locations, then updates it in real time. There's also an image on the site which illustrates how serious the problem is. It shows Earth viewed from space, hidden behind thousands of tiny orange, blue, purple, grey and pink dots. Each one represents an object. What did you feel when you first saw that image?
I cried.
You cried?
Yeah, it literally brought me to tears, because I just see how what we've done to the Earth, the ocean, the atmosphere, climate, we're doing to near Earth space. The trackable set of these anthropogenic space objects is probably around 30,000, which would range in size from a cell phone to the space station. Out of these roughly 30,000 objects, there's probably about 3,000 or so that are working, and everything else is garbage.
And that's just the objects large enough to be tracked.
The total population of these anthropogenic space objects, if you go down in size to about a millimeter, is probably around 500,000.
And as we heard from our previous expert, Don Kessler, a tiny chip of paint travelling at extremely high speed in space can do a significant amount of damage to whatever it hits. Collisions can happen, and they have. In 2009, an active US communication satellite operated by a company called Iridium was hit by a defunct Russian one. Thousands of bits of debris scattered. Collisions are rare, but Morobal's concerned that the rate of launches might reverse that.
Just in the past few years, we have gone from launching maybe 150 or so satellites a year to, like 100 satellites every few weeks. I think it's going to increase because we have a new space race. It's not dominated by geopolitics as it was. Now it's dominated by commercial ventures.
Low Earth orbit is where working satellites go. It's also where space is most congested.
We have services and capabilities that we depend on a daily basis, like position navigation and timing, like your cell phone telling you where you're located on the planet, like financial transactions and warnings of weather and all these things. It would set us back decades if we lost certain groups of satellites because of debris.
How real is that danger that debris will knock out satellites that people rely on?
I can tell you with absolute certainty that it's not a matter of if, it's when, if we don't change our behavior.
Not all abandoned objects stay in space. The ones which do re-enter the atmosphere typically burn up there, so don't reach the ground. But that process isn't a credible clearance solution. How much needs to be removed in order to make a difference?
Yeah, so here's where I have some bad news. We have to learn how to live within our own filth. We'll never get the bathwater clean, unfortunately. There's no way to clean up space.
Space will never be as spotless as it was before the rockets and satellites arrived, but efforts are underway to try and tidy up some of that man-made mess.
Part 3. The Flying Spider's Web.
Obviously there's that nervousness because you're going to find out whether everybody's work for 4 or 5 years is going to either be a success or a failure.
Early on a September morning in 2018, Richard Duke and his colleagues rushed into work to watch a video. It revealed the results of a pioneering experiment.
In our heads, we knew exactly what was going to happen and what it would look like, but seeing it for the first time all together as a video was pretty incredible.
It was all part of a mission called Remove Debris, made up of a group of international companies and academics, and led by the University of Surrey's Space Centre in England, where Richard worked at the time as a spacecraft communications engineer. They set out to demonstrate 4 potential ways to remove satellites which couldn't deorbit or bring themselves back down to Earth.
We're looking at how do you go and get the satellite when it's not working, when it's what we call uncooperative, when it's spinning and it's not got its own propulsion to come back down.
The team even made its own debris to fire into space and bring back. It was a small satellite fitted with monitoring instruments called a CubeSat. The series of experiments included 2 surprisingly primitive retrieval tools, a harpoon and a net.
So we had effectively a smart space net, and when it hits the debris, it can effectively wrap around that satellite and grab it like a drawstring bag. The harpoon is quite a good one. If you fire it, it can go into the side of the spacecraft and grab it. That's quite a nice quick grab you can do.
But could they actually work? The lack of air in space presents its own challenges.
We were very much a one-shot operation, so these experiments are all done automatically. Once the automation is set in motion, we can't go back and rerun the experiment. So we have to be very careful that everything's going to be perfect first time. From the harpoon, there's a slight worry about if it doesn't hit properly, you might break things up on it. The net, there was quite a few things we're looking at there, because if you just fired a net in space, there's no air friction. So if it hits the object, it's just going to push the object away. So the net has to be very clever in making sure that it sort of folds around the object and then, like this drawstring bag, captures it.
And so the experiments began. To achieve the best sun angles for filming the net, that experiment was conducted at 2 a.m. UK time, meaning Richard had a restless night.
And then it was the next morning, basically, as we all get into work, we started to get the video in with the net being deployed. You see this thing that looks very like a spider's web, and then you see it hit the debris, wrap around the debris, and then you just see it floating away. That's when we knew that it had been a huge success.
The net, with the CubeSat debris safely captured inside it, later burned up in the atmosphere. A few months later, the harpoon test also produced a stunning video showing it launching from the removed debris mothership and successfully spearing its target. The technology used in removed debris work is now being developed more widely within the space industry.
And that allows then other companies, and there's quite a few around the world now, to actually go and build operational missions where they can actually provide this as a service.
And there are even more options in progress. The European Space Agency signed an €86 million contract with the Swiss startup ClearSpace to remove a single 100-kilogram rocket with a giant claw. That's due in 2025. A Japanese startup plans to launch a test satellite in March 2021 to trap junk with magnets. There's a French idea to use iodine as a propellant to nudge small objects into the atmosphere to burn up. The removed debris project ended last year. Richard is now a space systems engineer at In-Space Missions in the UK, where he works on reconfigurable satellites, which can be reprogrammed and reused when their original mission ends.
You don't just sort space debris by taking out the debris, you also sort it by trying to prevent space debris in the first place.
Part 4. The Laws of the Universe.
There's not going to be one single silver bullet that's going to fix the debris problem. There's going to be a bunch of different ways. There's the tools in a toolkit. We have to make use of all of them. You heard it here first. Space is complicated.
Victoria Sampson is the Washington Office Director of the Secure World Foundation.
My organization looks at things that can affect our ability to get access to or use of space. And very obviously, space debris is a huge part of that conversation.
Junk is building up in low Earth orbit. Satellites are still launching, and a regular active cleanup operation is a long way off. So who's responsible for sorting this out?
No one is in charge of space. It's a common domain.
There's no global rules for space junk, but there are guidelines and international agreements.
You have the orbital debris mitigation guidelines that came out of a group of about 14 different space agencies that said, okay, here are kind of the best practices. We want to make sure that you don't unnecessarily create debris in orbit. You try and minimize how much trash you leave behind. End of life for your satellites. You don't just leave them up there forever. You figure out a way either to bring them back down or kick them far enough out there they're not going to interfere with other people's ability to use space.
There's another guideline which says a low Earth orbit satellite has to be disposed of within 25 years of completing its mission. There have been calls to shorten that end-of-life limit because it doesn't reflect the current rate of launches. It's up to individual countries to decide whether or not to roll these voluntary codes into domestic law, so some operators don't worry about ignoring them.
Right now, compliance for debris mitigation guidelines at low Earth orbit are maybe 40 to 60%. That's not good enough. The reason why there isn't always compliance with this is that If you save fuel to be able to deorbit, and that is to bring back down your satellites, that is fuel you are giving up for the satellite's mission. So essentially, you're shortening your satellite's life by a little bit to comply with this best practice. And then sometimes it's just not a priority, or the people decide to, take a chance and figure, well, we'll just won't do it, and we'll see what happens.
Are there any penalties for not following rules and guidelines?
There are no penalties right now. I mean, I think right now we have probably naming and shaming. International disapproval can be highly motivating, particularly if it affects your ability to get other things you want later on.
There are even more questions around the idea of countries paying into a clean-up fund. On Earth, there would be a tax. There isn't a system to do the same thing for space.
Of course, the devil is always in the details. Okay, well, you pay a tax. Who collects it? What do they use it for? Are they responsible for developing the technology?
There are so many unresolved questions. However, Victoria says, don't think that means nothing can be done.
Only a few countries can actually launch satellites. If they get together and say, okay, we're not going to allow people to launch until we know for sure how they're going to be doing debris removal, how they're going to be doing end-of-life sort of things, they can have a huge effect on what the space environment ends up looking like.
Can nations which don't get on Earth really work together to clean up space?
Well, I would say that politics on Earth are replicated in terms of politics in orbit. And of course, you look at the big three space powers right now, the United States, Russia, and China, don't go along so great sometimes. Having said that, you look at things like the International Space Station, which really, it was an experiment in diplomacy. Actors that have not always gotten along were able to coordinate and work together on a space program. I think it's definitely been a success. The international consensus doesn't come quickly or cheaply. It takes a while, but it's not impossible.
So can we solve our space junk problem? Low Earth orbit is a rubbish dump. Action to remedy that is being driven by guidelines and goodwill, not legislation. There is some hope. Removing junk on a regular basis is likely to be frustrated by responsibility and money issues, but preventing it happening in the first place is more feasible. Also, the growing number of commercial operators need to keep their satellites safe, so it's in their interest to make space cleaner. January 2021 saw a new world record for the number of satellites sent to space on a single rocket. There were 143. This edition of the Inquiry was presented by me, Charmaine Cozier, and produced in London by Viv Jones.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the United States is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content, APM, American Public Media, with support from Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, showing how the immune system can be enabled to attack cancer cells, has led to treatments for Hodgkin lymphoma and other cancers. danafarber.org.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere on Earth, but it's also an increasingly popular tourist destination. I'm Alan Little, and in the third episode of The New Arctic, I'll be looking at the economic and environmental impacts of tourism in this fragile region. That's The New Arctic, part of the Compass series, after the news on the BBC World Service.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. Emergency medical workers in Myanmar say at least 2 people have been killed and several injured at a protest in the city of Mandalay against this month's coup. Witnesses said police used live ammunition as they tried to disperse the crowd following clashes with shipyard workers who are on strike. It's an escalation in the military's response to the daily demonstrations across the country. A court in Russia has upheld a decision to jail the opposition activist Alexei Navalny for just over 2.5 years. Mr. Navalny had appealed against a ruling to convert an earlier suspended sentence against him into actual imprisonment. The head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, is due to travel to Iran today as efforts continue to persuade the country to resume complying with an international nuclear agreement. Rafael Grossi's visit comes 2 days before a deadline set by Iran for the US to act first. A woman has been found shot dead at a camp for displaced people in northern Syria that is notorious for holding a large number of families of Islamic State fighters. The on-hold camp has seen a surge in such killings since the start of the year. The murders are widely believed to have been carried out by IS militants. Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, has been hit by severe flooding, leaving whole neighborhoods submerged in water some 2 meters high. Rescue teams on rafts have helped people leave their homes for temporary shelters. In tennis, Naomi Osaka of Japan cemented her place as the emerging star of the women's game by beating American Jennifer Brady in the Australian Open final. She won in straight sets, 6-4, 6-3, securing her 4th Grand Slam title. Clutching the trophy, she said it felt incredible to play in front of fans again. BBC News.
June and July, it's very busy because of these big cruise ships going inside the fjord.
This is Eddie, one of many Filipinos who come to the high north each year to work in the tourism industry. He's part of a 5-man boat crew taking tourists on day trips around the coast of Svalbard in search of polar bears.
This area is called Villefjorden.
But right now it's lunchtime and guests are getting hungry, so he's out on the rear deck lighting a barbecue.
So now we're going to start to grill the pork, and after that we're going to grill the whale. Can I try a little bit of the whale?
Minke whale meat is commercially hunted in Norway, and in Svalbard it's all part of the tourist experience. I'm Alan Little, and this is the new Arctic, part of the Compass series on the BBC World Service. Given the debates over the future of oil and gas exploration, of mineral extraction, of increased infrastructure, and of new shipping lanes as the Arctic ice melts, it's time to consider another growth industry that's having an impact on communities above the Arctic Circle: tourism.
It is going to be a major part of the Arctic economic debate.
Mark Lantain is a political scientist based at the Arctic University of Tromsø and editor of the Over the Circle blog.
At the moment it is small, but it is seen as very much a growth industry. If you look strictly at Iceland, the Icelandic economy was hit very hard by the banking crisis in 2008-2009. And yet tourism was seen as largely responsible for turning the Icelandic economy around, to the point where tourism numbers reached 2 million per year a few years ago. Greenland has been looking at that saying, well, there appears to be quite a big demand for Arctic tourism, we should get involved in that as well. Canada, Alaska, even Siberia, they are undergoing the same debates. And with global demand now for adventure tourism and ecotourism, Instagram tourism, the Arctic is really seen as popular. But as many in Iceland will probably tell you, there is a downside. How much is too much? What is the environmental damage? And more importantly, what is the disadvantage to local populations? So there is such a thing as too much of a good thing.
Tourism throws up a range of complicated questions for remote Arctic communities, with potentially huge social and environmental consequences. Leslie Kamanuk is from Pond Inlet, Nunavut, today marketed to tourists as the jewel of the Canadian North because of its picturesque icebergs, glaciers, and abundant wildlife.
I used to perform for these cruise ships.
When you say you used to perform for the tourists, what did you perform?
The masters of ceremonies, opening and greeting people, and as a part of that, throat singing. So you go like you're trying to clear your throat. So throat singing is an imitation of animal noises. and entertainment, storytelling.
But as Leslie told me, the community suffers a high unemployment rate, exorbitant living costs, and a housing shortage. So, could an increase in cruise ships, for example, bring sustainable economic growth to the town?
I think that the communities have a lot more potential because I see people making an income. I used to run a lot of sewing programs, and one of my projects was, okay, let's target the cruise ships. I got funding and opened the visitor center 5 days a week. The women that attended ended up saying, okay, I made this much money from the cruise ships alone. So to see that aspect of the traditional arts as well as involved with community members, I saw the huge benefit. But also there's always a spin side. Other people, like the hunters that are seeing their wildlife, are being impacted.
So the presence of those cruise ships chases the wildlife away?
That is what they're saying, yes. And it's not just cruise ships. There's also private yachts that we're seeing.
Indigenous culture is also a big draw for tourists visiting the Norwegian part of the Arctic Circle, primarily the traditional reindeer herding of the Sami people. Tourists are offered the chance to experience supposedly authentic Sami culture by feeding the animals, for example, or sledding.
Tourists do not have to be a bad thing for the North if it's done in a way that respects culture and nature and could really support local communities.
Niklas Laber is from a traditional reindeer herding family and now runs the Center for Sami Studies in Tromsø, 400 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. He believes tourism has a positive influence.
I've seen a lot of good effects of tourists coming up, wanting to learn more about Sami reindeer herding culture, for example. And of course, the more people that knows about the culture, the more people who care about to preserve it. Sustainable tourism, that's the word. The invitation must be done by the communities. So it can't be done by a multinational company that comes in and says, like, hey, this is the guidelines that we want. But the local community is the one that has to invite the guests.
Scandinavia is following in Iceland's footsteps. Take Finnish Lapland. In 2019, there were over 3 million overnight hotel stays. From Santa Claus villages to luxury ice hotels to music festivals, it's a billion-euro industry in which authenticity is secondary to promoting the Arctic as a vast, pristine winter wonderland inhabited by reindeer and Santa's elves.
Welcome, children, to my very own Christmas wonderland, Santa's Lapland. Meet my reindeer and enjoy a sleigh ride through the snow. And hidden in the forest is my elves and igloo fantasia.
Gun-Britt Retter of the Sami Council.
Finland has unfortunately been too good on mass tourism in the north. We have also experienced of very ugly misappropriation of Sami culture, that they portray Sami as dirty, sitting in the smoky tents and make you black in the face, ash in the face and so on, and creating ceremonies of crossing the polar circle. We never had ceremonies of crossing the polar circle, and selling kind of fake dolls or like made in China. So we have also actively addressed and tried to seek dialogue with this misappropriation in tourism. So I think it's better than it was, for example, only 20 years ago. And Norway has never been good in mass tourism in the north. So I hope they don't do the same mistakes as Finland has done, and that we can address that early. But maybe that we are in a better position now than ever before to developing this industry the way we want. But maybe the tourism is also turning now on. The increased focus on climate change has created another tourist group, and that's those who want to come to see Arctic before it's gone.
Arctic today is a new hype.
Anna Kireva is a journalist based in Murmansk on Russia's Kola Peninsula.
As I live very close to Norway and Finland, I see all the three countries are fighting for the tourists in the Arctic. The richest one, they come to Norway. It's the most expensive one. They have the king crab, and they also have this northern lights. Those who can't afford Norway, they go to Finland. Also the same northern lights, the reindeers and all this Santa Claus thing. And then who don't have money for Finland, they come to Russia because that's really much cheaper and you have almost the same. So tourism, I guess it's a very easy sphere of business. You need to feed people, they need a comfortable place to live and something to see and to do. But it's also the sphere that can ruin everything if it's organized not in the best way.
Kaktovik, for example, is a predominantly Inupiat community of around 260 people on the northwest coast of Alaska. In 2008, the polar bear was listed as a threatened species in the United States. Matthew Rexford, Kaktovik's tribal administrator, believes this has only encouraged tourists to flock to Kaktovik, hoping to catch a glimpse before the species disappears.
Prior to that listing, we would see perhaps 50 visitors a year annually. That number has grown to more recently 2,500 visitors annually. And that has had an impact on our community. First, I guess there wasn't a proper planning. So when the influx of tourists come in, we have air carriers who frequently visit the community and bring in our supplies and have folks travel for medical purposes if needed to hospitals. A lot of the flights coming in and out of Kaktovik, a lot of the seat availability on those flights has decreased very drastically. And at the most I recall was an elder waiting 3 weeks in Fairbanks trying to come to Kaktovik, waiting for an available seat on a flight. And she was traveling for medical purposes and had to take care of the hotel costs on their own. So those are some of the big impacts that we've seen from the tourism.
It's been widely reported that conflict between bears and people is on the rise across the Arctic as sea ice melts, shrinking the bears' natural hunting ground. But that's not the whole picture. Human activity is also changing the animal's behavior, and the consequences of that can be fatal for bear and human alike.
Wow! Okay, here's how quickly they evacuated. They didn't even take down their laundry. They still haven't.
Mark Sabatini lives on Svalbard, where he runs the local English-language newspaper, Ice People. In August last year, he was covering a tragedy.
A polar bear attacked and killed the manager of the local campsite here in town. He was laying in his tent shortly before 4 in the morning. There were about 6 or 7 other people there at the time. One of them did manage to get a loaded rifle and shoot the bear fairly quickly, but the manager was already mortally wounded by the time that happened. The bear was also mortally wounded. It fled, but only made it a couple hundred meters away before it died in the parking lot of the airport. It was the first attack by a polar bear resulting in a person's death since 2011. We've had bears coming close to town fairly regularly, especially the past several years, this time of year in late summer, early fall.
Fred Hansen is head of Svalbard University's Safety Center. He has a theory as to why the bears are growing less afraid to enter the settlement.
One of the biggest problems is that if you see a polar bear, you will probably try to scare it off, but you will also like a picture. So you scare it a little bit, and it goes a bit away, and you take up your camera, and you start taking pictures. And that polar bear learns really fast that this is not really dangerous. It's just some loud noise, and then I'll scare her away, and I'll take her food. So we need to make people understand that you have to do this properly. If not, you're just making the situation worse.
And what of the polar bear population on Svalbard?
They will eat absolutely everything. I'm not worried about the species as such. It will survive. In the short run, we see the growth in the population. If the sea ice disappears completely, that probably have a dramatic effect for polar bears, but that's not the case yet. We will still see a growth in the population for many years to come.
In Longyearbyen, the largest settlement of Svalbard, tourism has rapidly developed over the last decade, replacing coal mining as the dominant industry. It now accounts for 40% of the labor force. In 2019, more than 77,000 tourists arrived by plane. The same number again visited by cruise ship to enjoy snowmobile tours, glacier hikes, boat trips, or dog sledding.
My name is Audun, and I own Svalbard Husky, together with my wife.
My name is Mia.
We're surrounded by vast wilderness with the Arctic tundra and high mountains with 116 dogs, huskies. So it's dog sledding, both winter and summer.
Really small groups, so we have a good welfare for the dogs.
As long as we can kind of earn the money in the high season that supports us in the low season.
Tourism here is seasonal. From March to August, companies make the bulk of their profits, enough to tide them over during the quiet, dark winter months of September to February. Because of COVID-19, there was no high season in 2020, which means that many local tourism businesses are facing financial ruin, losing up to 75% of their income.
Really bad.
Really bad.
Although we can't lie, we're still coping because me and Odin has a mindset that we just need food to our dogs, and we need to have so we can train our dogs in so they have a good welfare. So we are kind of
we're spreading the bottom every day.
Such dependency on tourism has left Svalbard's economy incredibly vulnerable. It is, after all, an unpredictable industry influenced by global events such as weather, war, politics, and pandemics. And the extreme remoteness of the archipelago, halfway between Norway and the North Pole, resulted in strict travel restrictions. 90% of the employees were laid off at peak spring season. Ronnie Brunvoll is head of the local tourist board, Visit Svalbard, which represents more than 70 companies.
We only have one small emergency hospital, so if there should be a big outbreak of corona in Longyearbyen, it would be a total disaster, really. The local businesses are really bleeding and are really struggling now. The restaurants are closing and the hotels are closing and people are leaving. It's not really about tourism, it's about the local society and the future for the 2,500 people living here.
And the regular influx of tourists in previous years hasn't been an entirely positive experience for the community. Here's the local scout group spending their summer evening out on the vast golden tundra hunting reindeer.
I've been asked for autographs 5 to 10 times. It's really funny. Me and my little brother, we have a little thing of selling homemade headbands and hats. But still, if I'm not selling, I don't really like if they come really near and take pictures. And now they finally built a fence around the school, so that no tourists are coming. Because I remember when we were playing outside, there were tourists coming to the schoolyards and taking pictures. The fence is for polar bears. Yeah.
But perhaps the greatest paradox of Arctic tourism is this, that those who come because they want to see the pristine wilderness while it's still here are themselves contributing to its disappearance.
Almost all the tourists that come up here have to be flown up.
Zdenka Sokolichkova is a social anthropologist doing fieldwork in Longyearbyen.
When you ask people who live here, for example, they perceive the whole cruise ship industry as unsustainable. We used to have the conventional, the big cruise ships that would come to Longyearbyen that would have up to 5,000 people on board. And in addition, you have the expedition cruise ships that are booming very much as well. And then it's not that much a burden for the town of Longyearbyen, but it definitely has an environmental impact. Definitely people feel that, like, the decision to stop with coal mining and come to tourism is not an environmental win, or it's not that obvious that it's a better thing to do so high in the Arctic.
Some of the small local businesses are already trying to minimize their footprint.
For example, in the yard here, we have windmills to kind of weigh up for the fact that we fly our tourists in, and then we do hunt. Yeah, we're also planning of getting a hydro generator when that becomes more available for normal people. Then we would have completely green energy.
And actually, the whole airport is also now putting on solar panels.
They're doing electric
planes burning leaded gasoline.
It has been difficult, with the cold and batteries, but it's coming. It's actually getting better and better. So
the fact that you do charge them on coal, which is a bit ironic, but we're getting there.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. Brim Explorer is a Norwegian company owned by two entrepreneurs who are setting a new standard for sustainable tourism with the world's first hybrid electric-powered whale-watching ships.
I'm Espen Larsen Hakkebo. I founded the company 2.5 years ago together with Agnes Anlatter, a friend of mine from university. I'll show you.
MS Bram is docked in Tromsø, the largest Nordic city north of the Arctic Circle, and a growing tourist destination itself. But Bram is headed for Svalbard later this year.
We have the full benefit of going completely silent with the electric engine, which means that we can encounter animals without interfering with their natural behavior. So we're just there.
I think hybrid electric, you get a diesel engine running.
So we're on the main deck now. We're going down 3 steps. We're outside the windows. You're not blocking the view from those sitting inside. It's a boat designed to be the perfect platform for experiencing nature on the ocean. Well, our main building materials are aluminium,